Welcome to BICOM's weekly Hadiyun podcast. I'm joined by Richard Pater in Israel, Kalev Ben-Dor in Israel, and our special guest for this week. We're very honored to have Haviv Rettig Gur from the Times of Israel. Haviv, welcome to the BICOM podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So we've kind of got you on because you've written really well about the nation-state bill, which is something we really want to focus on this week. There's been a huge amount of controversy. You've got the supporters of the bill saying that it enshrines all the sort of Jewish nation-state characteristics within the Israeli legal system. You've got the opponents saying that this is basically enshrining apartheid, or at least getting close to it. And this is really not a controversy that is going away. And I really wanted us to try and explore, I suppose, first of all, what was the purpose of this bill? Like, what is it actually trying to achieve? Because I think, within all the reactions, maybe what's got lost here is what was this actually all about at the beginning? Because this is a very long saga, isn't it?
Yeah, this bill has been in the works at least since 2008-9. It's been about a decade coming, and it has really two purposes in the view of its proponents. The first, about a decade ago, we saw the activist elite of Israel's Arab community, organizations like Adalah and Musawa, and the Arab Higher Monitoring Committee, as it's called, produce all kinds of documents of sort of constitutional intent. They wanted to talk about, one was Adalah's actual, imaginary constitution for Israel, and they wanted to talk about what it means for Israel to be a Jewish state. They're an ethnic minority, a large ethnic minority in the country, and they essentially demanded, all these different organizations in several different iterations and documents and conferences, essentially demanded that Israel abandon all the things that make it a Jewish state. If it's immigration for Jews, if it's any kind of religious identification of any state bodies of any kind, and become really sort of a civic democracy on the American model, where they're just citizens in a state and there's no legal identification of ethnicity or religion or anything like that. And there was a group of people, not, by the way, on the Israeli right, on the left, on the center, on the right, all sort of got together and started thinking about what it means that the leaders of this very large ethnic minority, they make up maybe 17, 18, maybe 20% of Israel's population, depends a little bit how you count them, that this group is demanding that the majority, the Jewish majority, give up its ethnic and national self-determination. And conceived of this bill as a way of anchoring in an Israeli constitutional law, and also, I think, as a way of giving a cultural statement, a response that was meant to be heard by Israel's Arab community as validation and reiteration of Israel's Jewish identity, sort of to explain to them, I don't want to be too unfair, but essentially, who's in charge? So the bill really is meant to be read by the original authors of this initiative by Israel's minorities. That's its original purpose. And that is also the source of all of the internal domestic Hebrew language debate, which is very, very different from the debate being had by I don't know what, pro-Israel, anti-Israel, BDS, progressives, all the different groups overseas who have very strong opinions about Israel, but don't always maybe know, Israeli culture and the history of the debates that are taking place in Israel. And so inside the Hebrew language debate, it really is not a debate about technical legalities. In terms of actual constitutional law, in terms of the actual rights that an Arab or a Jew has in this country, it's hard to see any change whatsoever. The law doesn't give a right that anyone didn't have, and doesn't take away a right that someone didn't have.
So essentially, what you're saying is it's not really a piece. It's not really a practical piece of legislation. It's basically a message that's being enshrined in legislation.
Yes, which is not in itself a bad thing. That's what constitutions, are. in an important sense. Obviously, Israel has other basic laws. I think there are 11. Some people count 13. The basic laws are divided in different ways. But Israel has a basic law, for example, of the judiciary, which defines the judiciary and what it does and what its powers are. And it has a basic law of the government and the Knesset. And it has two rights-giving basic laws. Basic law, freedom, human dignity and liberty. Basic Law, Human Dignity and Liberty, passed in 1992, and the Basic Law, Freedom of Vocation, which guarantees economic rights and rights to property and rights to essentially freedom of economic action to Israel's citizens. The Basic Law, Human Dignity and Liberty gives rights like bodily safety, or it doesn't give them, people have them, but it articulates them, bodily safety, privacy, movement, free movement, things like that. So Israel has these rights-giving laws. It has basic laws, constitutional laws about the separation of powers. A lot of the discussion about this law, about the nation-state basic law, the basic law of the nation-state of the Jewish people, has seemingly assumed, or has, overseas by English speakers, has taken as an assumption that Israel has just passed a constitution, that this is its constitution. How can there not be law, rights, individual rights contained in this law? But of course, Israel's been passing a constitution slowly, piecemeal, rather fitfully, not always wisely, over the course of the last 7 decades. And there already is a law that establishes the judiciary. There already is a law that gives certain rights. There already are such constitutional laws. And this was a law to deal very specifically with something that its authors felt was missing, and therefore could be challenged by this one very large, substantial minority that isn't just a minority. Israel's Arab citizens or Palestinian citizens, they themselves can be divided on what they call themselves in Hebrew, but they live within a competing and maybe exclusionary opposite nationalist movement with nationalist demands. And so there's a very real nationalist tug of war here between Jews and Palestinians. I hope I'm not saying anything that our listeners find too innovative. And that tug of war, this law is an attempt to send a message across that fight. And there's a sense, certainly on the Israeli right, that the challenge from that Palestinian national movement expressed by these Arab leaders in Israel is a real challenge to Zionism and to the legitimacy of the Jewish nation state. So they wanted to anchor it in the constitutional law as a statement. It doesn't have a tremendous legal difference, doesn't make a tremendous legal difference, but an important statement.
Yeah, but so just unpicking that a bit. So I mean, in some ways, what the law does is bring into focus the tensions that already exist, and it makes them very, very, very stark. The message being sent by the bill's supporters is intended to be received in that way, and it is being received in that way. And you have, very, very angry statements by Arab members of Knesset who are responding in that way. But just on the particular focus, I think, particularly in the UK, people have really honed in on, is this idea of the Arabic language and doing what I think, if you're trying to interpret the law makes no sense, because it says Arabic has now been made a special language, not one of the official languages of the State of Israel, and then the following clause in the bill says, nothing in this bill shall affect anything that existed before, so it kind of nullifies its own impact. What on earth is going on there, and why was it so important to put something in there about Arabic language? Because I think for some people looking at Israel think, well, Israel's part of the Middle East, lots of people speak Arabic, what on earth is this all about?
Yeah, the Arabic language, I believe that's Article 4. The question of the official language of Israel is a very, very interesting, really microcosm of the whole process. And you see exactly as you said, the subparagraph 3 there, or the clause 3 there, which nullifies itself. There is no declaration until this law. There's no legal place statement. A little bit, courts have ruled a little bit, not consistently, about the status of either Hebrew or Arabic, or English or Russian or Amharic or any language spoken by any sizable community in Israel. There are judicial precedents that have seen de facto that Arabic has to be a kind of official language in Israel, if only because state agencies have to be able to function with a minority that is very large, 20% of the country, in their language, and that 20%, a great many Arabic speakers in Israel speak Hebrew, but not always very well, and not all of them. And in fact, the weaker segments of the Arabic-speaking society in Israel, especially, for example, women, the poor Bedouin communities in the south, they're more likely to not speak Arabic. So whenever the police, for example, have to interact with them, or they have to come to court, and an Arab woman has to give testimony about, for example, sexual assault, and they can only give that testimony in Arabic, and the question becomes, how much does the state owe them to be able to function in Arabic in its relations with them? And the rulings have always been Arabic is an official language in that sense, and Israel has to know how to talk Arabic in all of its institutions, and people have to be able to access the state in Arabic, and that's been sort of a fundamental standard. So all street signs in Israel have Arabic on them. Because we're a country with 3 million tourists a year, they also all have English, Arabic and English next to the Hebrew. So Arabic has not been an official language officially, but it has been an official language unofficially. And with all these judicial rulings. Now here, the Israeli right has really, I think in the language clause, people are right to focus in on it, because this is the place where it becomes clear exactly what the Israeli right is doing, the validity of the complaint by Israel's minorities, that this is an insult to them, that it is a purposeful insult to them. In the Arabic clause, you see it. Because what the Israeli right has done is it has said, well, Hebrew is, by the way, it doesn't even use the word official. It just says Hebrew is the language of the state, full stop. Now, that has been true. I'll give you an example where Hebrew has been a language and Arabic not an official language. Knesset legislation. When the Israeli parliament passes legislation, the official version of that legislation is only the Hebrew version. That was immediately translated into Arabic and English and all the relevant languages of anyone who might need to read Israeli law. But the only version that you have to go to find out what is officially the law of Israel is Hebrew. So Hebrew has been the language of the state. And now they say, instead of saying an Arabic is a second official language or something like that, which is what Arabic speakers expected and have demanded over the course of the last decade of developing this law, the law says it has a special status. Technically, Arabic has been placed above all the other languages because it is the only language aside from Hebrew that has a special status. Technically, the status of Arabic has been improved. But in reality, the law goes out of its way to make sure to clarify that Arabic is still second to Hebrew, something that it didn't have to do, and that the doing so is seen as an attempt to put sort of the Arabic and therefore the cultures and minorities who speak Arabic in their place. And then, exactly as you said, Clause 3 in that paragraph, in that article, says nothing that we have said in this article can change anything that has been happening up until now, which is a reminder, this is not an interpretation, that is not an analysis by some political pundit, that is a clause in a constitutional law, that is an instruction. We are telling in this constitutional law the court and the police and everyone who might have to interact with the Arabic community that if you had to talk to them in Arabic, you still have to talk to them. We are specifically stating that nothing is changing. So why did we have to clarify that Arabic is second to Hebrew? And so it changes nothing at all on the ground. It is only a statement. And the statement is one side is the boss and one side is, allowed to hang around.
So if we look at the bill in totality, what does it actually change? I mean, we're trying to answer this question ourselves here. What does it now mean? If the Supreme Court is going to hear this petition by the Druze community at some point challenging the bill, what does the actual bill mean in terms of its impact? What will the Supreme Court do?
There's a debate about this inside Israel among the political and legal echelons, etc. There's a real debate about what it means. Most are arguing that it means nothing at all. It's possible that Article 7 about Jewish settlement could mean something, but of course Israel hasn't extended its civil law to the West Bank, and so we're not talking in this law about settlement in the West Bank. We're talking about Jewish settlement in the land of Israel behind the Green Line. And so settling Jews inside Israel is not controversial, even internationally. And so, it's not clear. Anyway, it's not at all clear that this changes anything legally. But there are those who say that there are that it is significant if we assume that the Israeli right was not mistaken about the Arab elite, these activists, Adala and Musawa and these different groups, planning to go to the High Court of Justice to campaign to begin a major political effort over the next few decades to demand that Israel stop being the Jewish state. Now, if that was going to become a very significant part of the Israeli Arab political scene, then this is a direct challenge to that.
Right.
That hasn't happened yet. So we don't know if that is something that Israeli Arab culture is a direction that it's going to go in. I can tell you that from what evidence we do have, from polls over the last 2 decades of Israel's Arabs, we actually find a trend in the other direction. There's a growing group, maybe has reached as much as half of Israel's Arab population, that actually is proud to be Israeli, that seeks integration into the Israeli Jewish mainstream, into the Israeli economy, into the Israeli judiciary, even into the military, which is a very different sort of, which is a real big step, certainly, for Arab speakers in Israel.
I'm interested that you have really framed the bill as being about the Jewish majority and the Arab minority, whereas there's all sorts of other reactions and other interpretations which see the bill as trying to affect a rebalance between the Jewish character of the state and the secular liberal equal democratic character of the state, and it's trying to sort of address a perceived balance there, which is potentially a sort of it's not about minority versus majority, it's more about Jewish versus secular Western liberal values, etc. And there's also this issue that's a bit of a micro issue, but about that clause in there about Israel's role versus diaspora, which has been perceived by American Jews as protecting the sort of flank of the ultra-Orthodox so they don't have to worry about the rights of progressives in Israel. But you've been very clear this is just really about the Arab minority, whereas there's also that element as well, isn't there, about the part I was talking about the Jewish state versus secular human rights liberal democratic state?
Yeah, and it's good that you're raising this. When the American founding fathers began to write the Constitution, they suddenly discovered how much people will take the moment, that constitutional moment, and try and insert into it the things that bother them. The state of Massachusetts tried to get fishing rights into the American Constitution because in Massachusetts that mattered very much. Once the vehicle of the bill was created, and was presented, I think it was first tabled in the Knesset in 2011 as an actual bill. Once it's presented in the Knesset, it became a platform, a vehicle for the expression of all kinds of other agendas. And so when diaspora is talking about how the word diaspora was inserted into the bill, the state of Israel will be responsible for caring for the well-being of all the Jewish communities. And then in the diaspora, that was in fact it was missing, the word in the diaspora, and it was put in there at the pressure of the ultra-Orthodox parties explicitly in order to ensure that the state of Israel was not now legally obligated to aid the reform movement and conservative movement in Israel. In other words, the diaspora concern is absolutely correct. That is the origins of that phrase in the bill. The questions of Jewish democracy, of Jewish and democratic questions of there used to be in the bill an appeal to Jewish law, Jewish religious law, and it was a statement that said it wasn't even a very strong statement, but it talked about how Jewish law is an influence on Israeli law, and judges should refer to it when they don't have clear Israeli civil law and precedent to go on. Then they can turn to Jewish heritage and Jewish law, and that phrase was removed, but it was removed after a lot of pressure. Incidentally, the chairman of the Knesset Constitution Committee, which worked on this bill and developed the bill, and where most of the debates around the bill actually happened, is Amir Ohana, who is a gay Likud right-wing member of Knesset. And so he's right-wing on security issues, on Palestinian question, but he is in fact socially very liberal, and he is actually very committed to gay rights. And he thought that putting in Jewish law in there would allow courts to rule according to Jewish law on questions of gay marriage or gay adoption or things like that. And so he is actually the reason that was taken up. So there are 1,000 fights. Once you're writing some sort of a constitutional amendment or statement of any kind, 1,000 different groups and parties and interests have an interest in what's happening, and it became a little bit of a complicated mix. I'll say one important thing about the Jewish democratic question. The Supreme Court of Israel has ruled time and again for decades, in relatively conservative courts and relatively liberal courts. It has always ruled that there is absolutely no gap between Israel's Jewish nature and Israel's democratic nature. Democratic principles demand that the Jews have the national self-determination in a state that is their national self-determination. A Jewish state, just like Greece is ethnically Greek in its laws, and Turkey has an ethnic Turkish element in its constitution, and that's okay, and that's true of most democracies. Most democracies identify an ethnicity which is not identical to its citizenry. And that is okay, and that is kosher, and that's democratic. And also, there's nothing anti-democratic in the Jewish side. In other words, Jewish principles and law and heritage and all of this mean that we should have an open society, a free society, a society without oppression, and therefore there is no gap between the two. Anti-Zionists, people who oppose the existence of a Jewish state in principle, have argued over the decades that a Jewish state, by definition, if you define it as Jewish, it cannot, by definition, take care of its minority and cannot, by definition, be democratic. The smartest criticism on the Israeli left at the moment of this law is not about Arabic, and it's not about insulting minorities, and it's not about those issues, which are very, very real. But it's the argument that the Israeli right, by creating a law that anchors, emphasizes, magnifies the question of Israel's Jewish identity, and that the Israeli right says it is doing so in opposition to all the laws, all the basic laws already on the books that define Israel's democratic and egalitarian identity, that by creating that juxtaposition on the right, the Israeli right has in fact bought into the anti-Zionist argument, that there's some kind of tension or some kind of gap between Jewish and democratic. And that's a part of the debate. So we're having a fascinating and deep debate about Israel's nature, and I think a lot of it is being missed overseas, in part because we speak Hebrew amongst ourselves. It's not always translated outward by our media or by activists fully.
Just finishing, really, I suppose, with the politics of it. I mean, I think, looking at what certainly, the political journalists were saying that, this was very political. This was about Bibi trying to go into an election period where he's protected on his sort of Jewish nationalist flank to say, no one can touch me. I introduced this bill. I wondered what you thought of that, and also I wondered what you thought about Naftali Bennett's statement that really just happened within the last few minutes on Wednesday, which is that he seems to be rowing back slightly on the issue with the Druze community, and he admits that. I mean, his exact words were, it's become clear that the manner in which the nation-state law was enacted was very damaging, especially to the Druze community and to anyone who has tied their fate to the Jewish state. So I guess that's code for, who serves in the armed forces. This, of course, was not the intention of the Israeli government. These are our brothers who stand shoulder to shoulder with us on the battlefield and made a covenant with us, a covenant of life. We, the government of Israel, have a responsibility to find a way to heal the rift. So that seems to be some kind of acknowledgement that there needs to be a bit of healing with some of these communities. But I wonder if you could address those 2 points, the politics and what the Bennett statement really means.
Yeah, let me start with the Bennett statement. I think it's fascinating. Your translation is very eloquent, but Bennett's Hebrew was even more visceral. It's not to heal the rift. It's a word that it means rift, but it also means wound.
Right.
In other words, there's a real sense that Bennett has realized that it's a little silly. I tweeted at Bennett that in response to this tweet, apologize for talking about my tweets, but that there they're startled. The Israeli right is startled that this bill crafted as a message to the Arabic-speaking minority, that the Arabic-speaking minority is not monolithic, and that in fact there are groups in the Arabic-speaking minority who have as many sons dead on the battlefield for Israel as the Jews per capita. And the Druze have been opposing this bill vehemently and loudly. Druze religious leadership, mayors, even members of Knesset on the right have been opposing this bill vehemently and loudly for several years now. And then everyone is startled that they are that they feel betrayed, and that yesterday, or I think it was maybe Sunday or Monday, they actually went and filed an official Supreme Court, High Court of Justice petition against the law. There's no chance that petition, will achieve anything. It won't cancel the constitutional law. By definition, the Supreme Court can't override it. But their point is to make the statement: you Jews have betrayed us, and we have bled on the battlefield for you. And so the Israeli right, which I think certainly in its political behavior often sees the world in very dichotomic, very black and white ways, is surprised that they can hurt people caught between the two national movements, so to speak. And I think that's fascinating and important. And I believe, I don't know how else they'll try to heal the wound. I believe that it will lead to changes to the basic law. I can tell you that today, Gabay, the head of the Labour Party, has announced today that when they defeat Likud and become the ruling party again, something that hasn't happened in 19 years, but they still aim for it, they will insert the word equality into the law. Something that everyone demanded, everyone on certainly the left and the center demanded of the right, and that the right refused to put into the law. This is not the law dealing with democracy and equality. That's the other laws. This is the law dealing with the Jewish aspect. And so Gabay said, no, we will put that word in, and it's in part a response to the Druze sense of being terribly insulted and diminished by this law. So yeah, the right is surprised that they've hurt people after trying to hurt people. That says, I think, a lot about how this has progressed.
And the politics of the Netanyahu interpretation that this is just his sort of, shield as he goes into an election season. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so often this kind of right-wing legislation is sort of off the cuff, it's silly, it's not meant to pass, and Israeli Knesset members don't let it pass. And it's really just sort of a press release to show the people, the activist right-wing base that lawmakers or the prime minister are very right-wing. These are sort of value signaling, most of these pieces of legislation. In this case, this is actually a very serious bill put together over many years by very serious people like Avi Dichter, who's the former head of the Shin Bet Security Service and a very thoughtful and serious man, and he's been the one pushing this in the Knesset for many years now, the most adamantly. And so this is a law that Netanyahu certainly thinks that advancing this now gives him credit in the primaries and in the fight for right-wing seats in the next election, which everyone expects to come toward the end of this year. And that's certainly why the window of opportunity for passing the law opens now, and why the law was able to move forward. But saying that Netanyahu saw a political reason and a political opportunity to push the law forward doesn't mean the law is only a political statement. This is the law that was developed as a very real, attempt to say something important in Israeli constitutional law. So it's absolutely true what you said. This is certainly a Netanyahu political act because of this political moment and because we're going to election. It looks like, but nevertheless, it wasn't just that. It wasn't just a sort of little political thing. It was something that a lot of people have been working on very seriously for a decade now.
Okay. Haviv, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. We've covered a great deal of ground, and no doubt our listeners will will appreciate the depth of your analysis and how much you're able to give them about the background and the impact of the bill. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.